What's up YouTube? Today I want to talk about Voxengo TEOTE. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. Basically, Voxengo TEOTE. It stands for That's Easy on the Ears. What it is it's an automatic spectral balancing tool. For those who are familiar with other plugins on the market, I guess you could somewhat compare it to something like Gullfoss EQ, which I think is sold as a kind of not quite an AI integrated, equalization system, but it's kind of designed to give you the best results no matter what you feed into it. There are specific kind of equalization curves that it tries to fit the input to. Without getting too technical, I kind of just want to show you, how magical this plugin can be. I know a lot of guys out there are against the use of kind of adaptive equalization and that kind of thing, especially in mastering contexts and the more kind of finicky contexts. But there's a few things in this plugin that, really shine, especially for revealing what might need to kind of be fixed with a traditional EQ or something like that. So I want to try outline as many different contexts that I would use it in this video. I want to start off with a bit of a kind of mastering context and then jump into individual track processing, and even the fact that you can kind of use this a little bit as a bit of a transient processor. It's got quite a nice kind of thing that it can add to bass lines. So anyway, without getting too complex, right here in the beginning, I want to save all of that for the rest of this video. But before I get started, I want to give a big thanks to Voxengo for sponsoring this video. So I want to try and remain as unbiased as possible in this video, and I'm not going to compare it to other plugins that do similar things, even though there aren't that many. But I just want to show you guys, how it works and what it does to the audio and how I would use it in my workflow. So yeah, anyway, let's dive in and have a look.
We are at rank.
So here I have a mix that I'm currently working on. It's a track that I have previewed a few times in previous streams and sound design tutorials and stuff like that. And I've kind of come to the point where I want to start nailing down the mix, start moving on to the track, and maybe start working on the next one. There's a couple of things that I think this particular plugin will help in this regard. Because I've been working on the track for quite some time, I've kind of adapted the sort of overall sonic profile to the particular sounds in the track, as opposed to trying to mix it to a kind of professional standard. One example is I think that the bass line is lacking a little bit in the subs, because I was going more for a kind of punchy vibe, but without looking too much at the spectral readouts and stuff like that. I was kind of just sound designing and creating the sounds, and at the time it started sounding good, and I'm listening to it and it's sounding good. But the moment we put on something like Voxengo TEOTE, we will start to see, what sort of changes we might need to make to get it to closer to a kind of professional spectral profile. So what I'm going to do, first of all, like I said, I want to start off showing you guys how this kind of works in a mastering context. So what I want to do is I want to apply this plugin onto my stereo output on my mixer. So I do have a limiter and a bit of a maximizer to raise the level when I'm recording, just because there's some differences in output and input levels on my recording software. Just bear in mind that limiter is not actually changing the sound, so it's not going to alter what you're actually hearing in terms of this particular plugin that I'm going to show you. So this is the plugin. Let's actually make it a little bit bigger, just to make it easier for you guys to see what's actually going on here. So first things first, I just want to bypass the plugin so you guys can kind of get an idea as to, what the sonic profile of this track is at the moment. So I'm just going to skip through a few parts and preview the track for you guys. Okay, you get an idea of what the track sounds like before we started getting into the kind of processing and, what this plugin actually does. So if you noticed, what was happening with this kind of spectral readout over here, it was kind of giving us these differences of curves, for example, when there was a part, like let's say, for example, in the intro or the beginning part that I showed you guys, there wasn't much high frequency activity going on. So what it was doing is it was saying like, okay, we're going to boost the high frequency activity over here. So like I said, what it attempts to do is it attempts to fit the input to a particular spectral profile that's predetermined that apparently sounds best to our ears. One thing to note is if we're using it on a full frequency example, like on a stereo output in a mastering context, apparently setting this dial over here, mastering, this little button on, makes the plugin work better with full frequency profiles. But when we start diving into particular channels like the kick and the bass and that kind of thing, we not necessarily have to turn this parameter on over here. You've also got control over the amount of bands that you want to split and process individually. So obviously I think the more bands that you've got analyzing and processing individually, the kind of more resolution you're going to get in the end. The closer you're going to get to a kind of more acoustically natural sound, I guess. But play around with these settings and just see straight off the bat what it does to your sound. It's quite revealing. So for example, I actually just want to show you and then we can record in some profiles of how it changes the audio, and you'll see it doesn't actually change it all that much, but the kind of audible difference is pretty massive. So let's check this out.
We are a drink.
So it's subtle but apparent, it kind of, to me, it feels like it opens up the top end. Maybe it's because, when I generally mix my tracks, it's because my ears slowly adapt, and I think the high frequency range is the most adaptable. It's after a short period of time, the sensitivity in our high frequency hearing does start to dull quite a bit. And I think because I've been working on this track for so long, maybe I've been dulling that sensitivity over that long period of time. Without coming back to something like this and checking like, okay, this is what it should be, if that makes sense. So, of course, there was quite a bit of, I'm not sure if you guys picked that up, but I could feel a bit of this kind of pumping motion, almost like you could kind of hear the attack and release of the dynamics processing. So here, there are a couple of different settings. I found it's with this kind of tempo and stuff, it's better to set this high timing up a little bit. And I tended to not adjust these bass attack and bass release too much.
We are a drink.
So if we compare pre and post, you'll see that it's made these kind of like subtle adjustments here and there in the frequency spectrum to, open up the overall sonic profile, which I think it's quite a massive difference, considering that it's not adding anything to the track. It's not adding harmonics. It's not doing anything like that. It's simply using dynamics processing. And as far as I know, there isn't any kind of adaptive filtering or EQ happening here. It's simply dynamics processing per band. So I think that retains a lot more of the natural phase profile of the input. So you don't get any kind of like phase issues and that kind of thing, which often happens with adaptive EQ systems.
We are at drink.
So what effects and boost are doing, effects is basically like a dry wet parameter. Well, not really. It basically changes the amount of change that's being applied. And the boost, I believe it's the volume input. So, for example, if we have a low signal coming in, but we want to profile it slightly higher, then we could adjust this boost amount. And vice versa. If the signal is coming in already maximized and stuff like that, we could adjust the boost to make up for that amount of difference in gains.
We are at drink.
Okay, so you can see how effective it can be in a mastering context. Although that being said, I think that the kind of dynamics processing, like the attack and the release, can sometimes be a little bit too audible. So with this kind of thing, like I like to see what kind of suggestions it makes. So for example, there was a couple of things in the mid-range and the top end that I think I maybe need to go back into the mix and fix, which will kind of even out the overall spectral profile. And it won't need too much of these kind of like dynamic adjustments, hopefully. Try reduce the amount of work that this plugin is actually doing, maybe to the point where we don't actually need the plugin. I think ideally the best would be able to get a good sounding mix through into the mastering rack without having to do any equalization processing or anything like that. But again, this plugin just revealed to me what needs to be done, which I think is super powerful. It kind of gives us this a couple of goals to work towards to get a cleaner mix. So yeah, like I said, I'm going to dive into the mix now. We might come back to this mastering context a little bit later on in the video. But for now, what I want to do is I want to start diving into individual tracks and show you guys how I would use this type of thing to adjust, what's going on in particular tracks. So I've got a bunch of percussions and stuff. I was busy comping this down to stems just to make it a little bit easier to mix, because there was a lot of plugins and stuff in the actual project. So I just need to add a few more groups and stuff before we move on. Cool. So I found like a full percussion loop here. What I want to do is I want to put this plugin onto our percussion group, and we can start looking at a couple of other really special features about this plugin. So here, this section over here, the spectral profile, showed you what the bands does. But this basically deals with how the plugin inputs the signal and how it deals with applying the spectral profile to that signal. So in an example with, Cytron's percussion group, we've essentially got no lows going on in this channel. We want to cut all those lows out because we want the lows to be the kick and the bass predominantly. So, if we have a look at what's happening here, what the suggestions are being made. The plugin is basically trying to tell us this signal needs more lows, because the plugin thinks that it's a full frequency profile that it needs to sort of copy. So here you've got low cut and high cut, and you can use these to kind of like zero in on that specific band that you want to work in. Let's hear the full mix, how it fits.
Higher beings of intelligence.
So here, as you can see, let me just go back to that kind of like full loop that we had, so I can loop it here solo. It was saying that, some things need to be added in the mid-range and some things are taken out in the high range to kind of get a better sort of sound from these hi-hats or from this percussion in general. But what I want to do is I want to kind of solo in on which sounds it thinks kind of needs what. I believe it's trying to add lows to maybe these djembes. Let's have a listen here. No, I'm wrong. It's trying to add highs to that one. So let's just maybe give this EQ some highs and see how this plugin reacts. So this EQ would be before TEOTE. This is actually the kind of like channel EQ. And then it's feeding into the group which TEOTE is on. Okay, I think a shelf is too drastic. Let's maybe use a bell. I think it's saying I should add more low or mids to the snare. Great, so I've disabled the TEOTE plugin, so it's not actually working. It kind of just helped us to figure out how to EQ those percussions, and I think it sounds great. So let's hear it in context to the rest of the track. Okay, so I put it on the synth channel there. It wasn't actually working too hard, just doing a little bit of adjustments here and there. So I want to jump back to the mastering context and just see how much it's working now in relation to, what we've just done.
With higher beings of intelligence.
Cool, that's already sounding better. It's not making that much adjustments anymore. So it does do a little bit to the low end. So I think let's, and I actually also did want to show you guys something really, really cool about this, is that you don't necessarily have to use it in a kind of like mixing equalization context. It does something really nice in a kind of like transient design kind of context. So I want to show you guys the kick and the bass, and we're going to try to use this to kind of add like a bit of transient to a bass line, which may need a bit of sort of pluck or punch on the top end. Let's check this out here. So that's just something, you know, I added. Don't think I changed too much here in terms of the actual settings and stuff. I just, you know, boosted it a little bit. So how it works is this kind of becomes your dry wet mix of this kind of like transient parameter. As you can hear, it kind of adds a little bit of almost like harmonic bite to the punch of the sound. So that's dry. Just using my kind of regular analysis method of, you know, loading up another track, checking out its reference, I could see that my track was, like I said, lacking a little bit in the subs. This wasn't bringing that out too much. It wasn't showing me too much, but I think it's because, you know, not much music is as focused on like the sub as, you know, electronic dance music. So this is a very important thing. And yeah, I noticed in my reference, so I just used a little bit of light equalization to boost the sub a little bit and reduce a little bit of this range, I believe. I think that sounds a lot better on the low end. And we're using this as a nice little bit of transient shaping on the sound. So let's have a look at the kick. So I'm going to load TEOTE onto the kick, and let's check out what it's doing here. So it's basically telling us we need more high end in the kick, and that's exactly what I added with this equilibrium. I think it also suggested some changes in the low end and stuff. So I basically just tried to map out that curve with something like equilibrium, and the result was this. I'm going to turn off TEOTE so you can hear the kind of entirety of the mix now. So in the context of just kick and bass, the kick might sound like a little bit too top end, a little bit too punchy, but I think it really helped to cut through the entire mix, because the mix did have a lot of mids and highs, and having a kind of very, you know, high frequency kick helps to really cut through the mix that way. Awesome, that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed my walkthrough of Voxengo TEOTE, however you pronounce it. Yeah, big thanks to Voxengo for sending me this plugin and sponsoring this video. And yeah, if you like this video, hit that like button, consider subscribing if you haven't yet. See you guys next time. Cheers.